A young boy's life changes forever after a single encounter with a racist police officer, sparking a fight for justice that will shake an entire community. But what happens when the truth hidden beneath the surface finally comes to light? Before we dive into this powerful story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. It was an ordinary afternoon for 11-year-old Jaden Walker. He had just returned from school and eagerly rushed to the front door of his family's modest home. A package sat on the doorstep, the new video game he had been waiting for. He reached for it, but a sudden voice from behind made him freeze. "Hey there, you little thug. What are you doing at this house?" Officer Eric Malone, a local cop with a notorious reputation, stepped out of his patrol car, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Jaden turned, heart pounding in his chest. I live here," Jaden stammered, his small voice shaking under the weight of the accusation. Officer Malone scoffed. "Yeah, right. A white family lives here. Now put that package down before I haul you in for theft." Jaden's pulse quickened. "But I'm telling the truth, officer. This is my house. My name is Jaden Walker." He pointed to the mail with his name clearly printed on it. "Jaden Walker? You expect me to believe that?" Malone's tone was laced with disdain as he circled around the boy, eyeing him up and down. "You don't belong in this neighborhood, boy." The tension in the air was palpable. Jaden looked around, desperate for anyone to help. But the street was empty, and the neighborhood was quiet. "Please, just let me go inside. My mom's home. She can tell you." Malone sneered, pulling out his handcuffs. "Opening someone else's mail is illegal. You're coming with me, punk." Jaden tried to step back, but Malone reached out, grabbing the boy by the arm. "No, please, sir, leave me alone. I'm telling you the truth." The panic in Jaden's voice only seemed to fuel the officer's aggression. He shoved Jaden toward the patrol car, and in the struggle, Jaden fell to the ground, scraping his hands. Tears welled up in his eyes as he begged the officer to stop. Malone's patience snapped. "Back away from the door, kid, or I'll shoot," he yelled, drawing his taser. Jaden froze, fear gripping him like a vice. His breath hitched as he whispered, "Please don't shoot me." Without hesitation, Malone fired the taser. The electric shock surged through Jaden's small body, causing him to collapse to the ground in agony. His limbs twitched uncontrollably as he gasped for breath, the pain radiating through his body. His vision blurred as he struggled to hold back sobs. Through the haze of pain, Jaden heard the front door open. His mother, Samantha Walker, rushed out, her face a mix of terror and rage. "What are you doing to my son? Get away from him!" Samantha knelt beside Jaden, pulling him into her arms. She glared up at Officer Malone, her heart racing. "He wasn't stealing anything. He lives here." Malone's expression faltered for a moment, but then he shook his head. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this kid doesn't belong here. I've never seen him in this neighborhood before." Samantha stood, her voice trembling with fury. "Just because you've never seen him doesn't mean he doesn't belong here. You tased an innocent child because of the color of his skin." Malone's grip on his taser tightened as Samantha's words hit him. He had been in situations like this before, where he could feel his own biases creeping in. But this time, there was no hiding from it. His body language shifted defensively. I thought he was breaking in," Malone muttered, but his confidence wavered under Samantha's fierce gaze. "Breaking in? He was standing on his own porch." Samantha yelled. She wasn't backing down. "What you did was criminal. My son is 11 years old, and you've scarred him for life." The commotion had started to attract attention. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly neighbor from 2 houses down, peered out from her window, her face pale with shock. She had always known Officer Malone to be harsh, but this was different. Other neighbors stepped out onto their porches, whispering among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. Jaden, still trembling from the taser's effects, clung to his mother. He could feel the burning stares of the neighborhood piercing into him, people he had grown up around, people who had never looked at him like this before. Samantha pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. "I want to file a report. My son was just tased by a police officer without reason," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. Malone's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling your supervisor," Samantha spat. "You won't get away with this," Not this time. The suspense grew as the officer realized the situation was spiraling out of his control. His reputation, his badge, everything he'd relied on for years was now at risk, and all because he had acted on his prejudices. Inside his patrol car, Malone sat in silence as he watched Samantha speak to the emergency operator. His mind raced. He had been on the force for years, and his actions had never been questioned like this before. But now he had gone too far. His racist assumptions had led him to tase a child. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Captain Wright, his commanding officer. Report to the station. Now. The walk to his car felt like a mile as Malone turned away from Samantha and Jaden. The eyes of the neighbors bore into him, their judgment clear. His steps were heavy, his mind clouded with dread. He could feel the weight of his badge pressing down on him, heavier than it had ever felt before. As he drove to the station, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. This wasn't just a mistake, it was the beginning of his downfall. The system he had relied on for protection wouldn't shield him from this. Samantha's fight for justice began that evening as she filed complaints against Officer Malone. The police station received her report, and it sparked an internal investigation. As days passed, the community became divided. Some neighbors stood with the Walkers, horrified by what had happened. Others, however, defended Malone, believing his actions had been justified. He was just doing his job, they muttered. Tensions in the neighborhood rose, with conversations growing more heated, and it wasn't long before protesters gathered outside the police station, demanding accountability. Jaden struggled quietly at home, reliving the taser incident over and over. His sleep was filled with nightmares, his mind replaying the pain and fear. At school, whispers followed him wherever he went. Kids avoided him, some out of curiosity, others out of discomfort. He felt like a stranger in his own life. Meanwhile, the internal investigation into Officer Malone began to uncover disturbing details from his past. Complaints of racial profiling and aggressive behavior had been swept under the rug for years. Samantha's lawyer, Angela Coleman, worked tirelessly to dig up more evidence, but they faced immense pressure from the police force, who sought to suppress the growing scandal. Malone's personal life began to unravel too. The media attention and internal pressure were taking their toll, and he became increasingly erratic and desperate to keep his life from falling apart. As the investigation progressed, Malone's defense attorney, Martin Graves, became concerned. The media was turning against them, and the Walkers' legal team was gaining ground. They were preparing for a full-scale trial, one that would pit the entire police force's integrity against the innocent 11-year-old boy who had suffered under its hand. The case was heating up, with each side gathering their forces. The day of the trial finally arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the aisles, eager to see the confrontation unfold. Jaden sat beside his mother and father, nervous but determined. He would face the man who had nearly destroyed his life. Officer Malone, seated beside Graves, was visibly tense. His lawyer rose to deliver a smooth opening statement, painting Malone as a man of integrity who had been forced into an impossible situation. Graves argued that Malone had merely been protecting the community from what he perceived as a potential threat. But when Jaden took the stand, the courtroom went silent. The boy, shaken but resolute, recounted the events of that fateful afternoon. He described the fear, the confusion, and the pain he felt when Officer Malone tased him. His voice trembled, but with each word, the weight of his story pressed down on the jury. Samantha's heart broke as she listened to her son relive the trauma. The defense was quick to cross-examine Jaden, attempting to poke holes in his story, questioning whether Malone could have believed Jaden was a threat. But the more they pushed, the more the truth shone through. Jaden was simply a child in his own home, and Malone had acted out of bias, not justice. As the trial progressed, a shocking twist came to light. Angela Coleman had uncovered emails from Officer Malone's work account. Racist, derogatory remarks about people of color, often sent to fellow officers. The emails painted a picture of a man who had long harbored racist views, and they exposed the systemic issues within the department. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the emails were read aloud. Graves tried to argue that they were out of context, but the damage was done. The jury's perception of Malone had shifted, and even his fellow officers began to distance themselves from him. Officer Lauren Martinez, who had anonymously leaked the body cam footage of the taser incident, was called to the stand as a witness. Martinez was a young officer, new to the force, and she had been disgusted by the culture of silence she encountered. Taking the stand, she described how Malone and others were allowed to act with impunity and how the department had failed to hold its officers accountable for their biases. Her testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom, but it also put her in the crosshairs of her fellow officers. She knew she had made enemies by coming forward, but Martinez believed in justice more than she feared the consequences. After weeks of testimony and tense courtroom exchanges, the trial neared its conclusion. Closing arguments were made, and the jury was left to deliberate. The Walkers waited anxiously, their fate now in the hands of the court. When the jury returned, the courtroom held its breath. The verdict was read. Officer Eric Malone was found guilty on all counts. The room erupted in emotion. Samantha held Jaden tightly, tears streaming down her face. Justice had been served, but the battle had taken its toll on them all. Malone, slumped in his seat, his career and reputation destroyed, could do nothing but stare ahead blankly. His appeal was swiftly dismissed in the months that followed, and he faded into obscurity. As the Walkers began to rebuild their lives, Jaden's trauma lingered. He struggled with anxiety and nightmares, but through therapy and the unwavering support of his family, he began to heal. His brother Sean stood by his side, helping him find his footing again. Officer Martinez, despite being ostracized from her department, became a symbol of courage. She was offered a position in a civilian oversight committee dedicated to holding officers accountable for their actions, a role she accepted with pride. Reforms were introduced in the police department, sparked by the Walkers case. The city saw changes in policies and a growing awareness of racial bias in law enforcement. Samantha and Michael became advocates for police reform, working with community leaders to ensure that no other family would have to endure what they had. Sitting around the dinner table one evening, Jaden looked at his family and smiled. They had won their battle, and while the scars of that fight would remain, they knew that together they had made a difference. The world had shifted, even if only a little, toward a better future. Jaden had been quiet since the verdict was read. The relief that washed over his family felt distant to him. Everyone celebrated their victory, but inside, Jaden still felt trapped by the memories of that day, by the lingering feeling of fear that clung to him like a shadow. One evening, his father, Michael, sat down with him at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the background. Michael looked at his son, his heart heavy. "You've been through a lot, Jaden," he said gently. "It's okay to not feel okay right now." Jaden looked up, his eyes full of questions. "Why did this happen to me, Dad? Why do people hate me when I didn't do anything wrong?" Michael's heart broke a little. "There are some people who judge others because they're afraid of what they don't understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But that's their weakness, not yours. You're strong, son, stronger than you know." The days following the trial were filled with interviews, phone calls, and media attention. But behind closed doors, the Walkers began to focus on healing. Samantha insisted that Jaden see a therapist to help him process the trauma. At first, Jaden was hesitant. Talking about his feelings wasn't something he was comfortable with, especially not with a stranger. During his first session, Jaden sat quietly, fidgeting with his hands as the therapist, Dr. Evans, gently prodded him to talk about what had happened. "I don't want to think about it," Jaden muttered, his eyes fixed on the floor. Dr. Evans nodded. "It's okay if you don't want to talk about it right now. Healing takes time, and it's your choice when you're ready. But I'm here for you when you are." Jaden felt a small sense of relief. For the first time since the incident, he realized that it was okay to take his time. He didn't have to be strong all the time, and he didn't have to pretend that everything was fine. As Jaden slowly opened up in therapy, he also found comfort in his older brother Sean. The two boys had always been close, but the events of the past few months had created an unspoken tension between them. Sean had been Jaden's protector during the incident, but now Jaden felt like he needed to prove that he could stand on his own. One afternoon, while they were tossing a football in the backyard, Jaden finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you how scared I was," he said quietly. Sean caught the football, pausing for a moment. "You don't have to apologize for that. You don't have to be anyone but yourself." Jaden shrugged. "But you were always there, being strong for me. I feel like I should be stronger." Sean tossed the ball back with a smile. "Being strong doesn't mean you don't get scared. It means you keep going even when you are. And that's what you did, Jaden. That's what you're still doing." For the first time since the trial, Jaden smiled, a small but genuine smile. As the Walkers worked on rebuilding their lives, the police department was in chaos. The revelations about Officer Malone's actions and the systemic cover-ups had led to a full-scale investigation. Officers who had previously defended Malone now distanced themselves, fearing the blowback from their association with him. The Internal Affairs Division uncovered even more incidents of racial profiling and abuse that had been swept under the rug. Captain Wright found himself at the center of the controversy. He had been aware of Malone's behavior, but had done nothing to stop it. When the news broke that Captain Wright was under investigation, it sent shockwaves through the community. The public demanded accountability, and soon, Wright resigned in disgrace, further exposing the rotten core of the police department. Meanwhile, Officer Lauren Martinez had become something of a public hero. After testifying against Malone and exposing the corruption within the force, she was ostracized by her colleagues. Her superiors offered her a quiet transfer to another precinct, but Martinez refused. She didn't want to be quietly pushed away. She wanted justice. Martinez began working with community leaders, advocating for police reform and speaking out against the culture of silence within the force. Her bravery attracted the attention of civilian oversight groups, and soon, she was offered a position on the city's newly formed Police Accountability Committee. It was a chance to make real change from the inside, and Martinez accepted it with pride. But it wasn't easy. The backlash from her former colleagues was relentless: harassment, threats, and isolation. Yet, Martinez remained steadfast, knowing that her actions had helped bring justice to Jaden and many others who had suffered in silence. One night, as Martinez was leaving a late meeting, she was confronted by Officer Jake Daniels, one of Malone's closest allies on the force. Daniels had always been the silent enforcer, the kind of cop who looked the other way when things got dirty. Now, he stood in the shadows of the parking lot, waiting for Martinez. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" Daniels sneered, stepping out from the darkness. "You betrayed us. You betrayed your own." Martinez's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "I did what was right," she said firmly. "You should have too." Daniels took a threatening step closer. "People like you don't last long in this city. You're just a pawn. When this all blows over, no one will remember you." Martinez stared him down, refusing to back away. "Maybe. But I can live with myself knowing I stood up for what's right. Can you?" For a tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a final glare, Daniels turned and walked away. Martinez knew the battle wasn't over, but she had faced worse. She had survived Malone, and she would survive this. Months after the trial, Jaden stood outside the courthouse, looking at the steps where so much of his life had changed. He had come a long way since that day Officer Malone tased him. The nightmares still came, but they were less frequent now. The anger still bubbled under the surface, but it no longer controlled him. Jaden was stronger now, not just because he had survived, but because he had faced his trauma head-on. As he stood there, Sean joined him, putting an arm around his younger brother's shoulders. "We did it," Sean said quietly. Jaden nodded. "Yeah, we did." The trial had left a lasting impact on the community. New reforms were introduced to the police department, including mandatory body cameras, independent oversight committees, and racial bias training for officers. The changes weren't perfect, but they were a step in the right direction. Samantha and Michael became vocal advocates for these reforms, attending town hall meetings and organizing community events to keep the momentum going. The Walkers had become leaders in their own right, using their story to push for a better future for everyone in the city. Officer Malone, now serving time for his crimes, attempted one final act of defiance: an appeal. His lawyer argued that the trial had been biased, that the media had turned the public against him. But the appeal was quickly dismissed. The evidence was overwhelming, and no one was willing to entertain his claims. Malone's life had unraveled completely. He had lost his job, his freedom, and the respect of the community. Alone in his cell, he realized that his downfall had been inevitable. He had lived by a code of hate and fear, and in the end, it had destroyed him. The walkers sat around the dinner table, laughing and talking as they passed plates of food. It had been a long, hard journey, but they had come through it stronger. Jaden looked around at his family, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. "I'm proud of you," Samantha said, squeezing his hand. "You never gave up." Jaden smiled. "Neither did you." As they sat together, the future felt brighter. The city was changing, slowly but surely, and so were they. There was still work to be done, but for now, they could breathe. They had won their battle, and the world felt just a little bit safer. Thank you so much for watching this powerful and emotional journey of justice, resilience, and courage. We hope this story resonated with you and shed light on the importance of standing up for what's right. If you found this story impactful, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more stories that aim to make a difference. Together, we can create change.